At 2:17 in the morning, my phone lit up with Owen's name. It was the hidden burner phone I had slipped into his backpack 3 weeks ago, right before things at my father's house became dangerously unpredictable. I'm Jenna Lawson, a 28-year-old emergency room nurse accustomed to high-pressure situations, but seeing my little brother's call at this hour made my blood run cold. I answered immediately. Before I could even speak, a trembling whisper came through the receiver. "Jenna, they locked the cabinets again. I'm so hungry." My grip tightened. The sheer terror in his hushed voice told me everything. I could hear the faint, suppressed rhythm of his breathing, as if he was terrified someone was standing right outside his bedroom door, listening in the dark. I didn't waste time asking pointless questions. "Owen, listen to me," I whispered back, my voice firm. "Do not leave your room. Hide under your blankets and keep this phone hidden. I'm coming right now." Grabbing my car keys, I threw a heavy coat over my pajamas. Within minutes, I was tearing down the empty highway, speeding straight toward my father's sprawling mansion in the isolated suburbs of Charlotte. They had no idea I was coming. More importantly, my father and my stepmother had no idea that before dawn, the police would be reviewing the exact security footage they thought they had permanently erased. If you believe quiet evidence can expose the loudest lies, stay with this story and subscribe for more family drama told from the inside. The gate opened before I had decided what I would say to Richard. I had punched in the old maintenance code Owen had secretly texted me months ago, praying they hadn't bothered to change it. The heavy iron gates of the private community swung inward, allowing my car to slip through the darkness. As I pulled up the long, sweeping driveway, I noticed the sprawling mansion wasn't entirely asleep. Warm, golden light spilled from the expansive windows of the living room and the designer kitchen. Leaving my car near the fountain, I moved quietly to the side entrance. The door was unlocked, a careless mistake by people who believed their wealth made them invincible. I stepped inside. The air was perfectly climate-controlled, smelling faintly of expensive vanilla candles. The kitchen was a masterpiece of modern luxury. Pristine marble countertops, a massive stainless steel refrigerator that hummed softly, and custom cabinetry. But my eyes immediately locked onto the walk-in pantry. A sleek digital keypad glowed ominously right above the handle. "Jenna." The whisper came from the shadows of the back staircase. Owen was standing there, swallowed by a gray hoodie that looked 3 sizes too big for his frail frame. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. There were no tears in his eyes, just a hollow, terrified expression, as if he expected me to turn around and leave him behind. I hurried over, kneeling slightly to meet his gaze. "Owen," I kept my voice low, "what have you eaten today?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured for me to follow him up the narrow servant stairs to his bedroom. Once inside, he knelt on the plush carpet and pulled out a battered shoebox from deep under his bed. He opened the lid carefully. Inside were 3 small, crinkled packets of saltine crackers and a single crushed granola bar that had been snapped in half. My heart broke. I looked around the room, then thought about the massive, fully stocked kitchen directly beneath us. Richard and Marla lived in an estate overflowing with excess, yet my brother was hoarding stale crackers in a shoebox like a prisoner of war. "Well, isn't this a touching midnight reunion?" I spun around. Marla stood in the doorway, draped in a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her expression was perfectly smooth, her voice dripping with an eerie, rehearsed calmness. She didn't look surprised to see me, only mildly inconvenienced. "What exactly are you doing in my house, Jenna?" Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway before I could reply. Richard appeared behind his wife, tightening the belt of his cashmere dressing gown. He didn't even glance down at the shoebox. He didn't look at Owen, who had immediately shrunk back against the wall. "Who gave you the right to break into my home?" Richard demanded, his voice thick with authority and annoyance. "He called me." I stood up, placing myself between them and Owen. "He's starving. You locked the food away." Marla let out a soft, dismissive sigh, crossing her arms. "Oh, please. He is just being dramatic. We are implementing a new dietary schedule because he has a bad habit of testing boundaries." "Testing boundaries?" I repeated, my voice shaking with restrained fury. Richard stepped forward, his eyes cold and unyielding. "This is my house, Jenna. Under my roof, my rules apply. You do not get to barge in here at midnight to judge how we raise him. Now get out. I glanced past them, visualizing the glowing keypad on the pantry downstairs. I couldn't force it open right now, nor could I drag Owen out without a legal fight Richard would easily win. But looking down at the broken granola bar, a chilling realization settled deep in my chest. Owen wasn't just hungry because he missed dinner tonight. This was systematic. I wanted to take Owen with me, but the law was the first wall in front of us. My first instinct was to grab my brother's hand, drag him out to my car, and drive far away from this toxic household. But reason quickly extinguished that fire. Richard was still his primary legal guardian. If I forcibly removed a minor from the premises in the middle of the night, my father would instantly twist the narrative. He would paint me as an unstable, hysterical sister attempting a kidnapping. The authorities would hand Owen right back to him, and I would lose whatever limited access I currently had. Marla shifted her weight, deliberately stepping closer to Owen. It was a subtle, predatory movement, a silent warning for him to keep his mouth shut. "If you don't leave my property this instant," Richard warned, pulling his phone from his pocket, "I will have the police escort you out for trespassing. Do not test me, Jenna." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. Arguing would only give them ammunition. If I lost my temper, I would become the out-of-control antagonist in their carefully constructed story. I turned my back on the adults and focused entirely on my brother. "Owen," I said, making sure my voice was steady and reassuring, "I am going to call you later. Keep the phone hidden exactly where we planned." He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Without another word to Richard or Marla, I walked out the same side door I had entered. The drive back felt suffocating. 10 miles down the highway, my adrenaline crashed, leaving my hands trembling against the steering wheel. I pulled into a brightly lit, deserted gas station, threw the car in park, and grabbed a small notebook from my glove compartment. I had to document everything while it was fresh. I wrote down the digital keypad securing the pantry. I noted the pathetic stash of stale crackers in the battered shoebox. I meticulously recorded Marla describing starvation as a boundary testing issue, and Richard's complete lack of concern regarding his son's physical well-being. Every detail mattered. Sitting in the harsh glow of the station's neon lights, I dialed Derek Shaw. He answered on the second ring, his voice rough from sleep, but instantly alert. Derek wasn't a private investigator or a lawyer. He was simply my oldest friend. I didn't need him to investigate or solve the problem. I just needed an anchor to help me calm down and process the nightmare. I poured out everything that had just happened, my words rushing together in a frantic stream. When I finally paused to take a breath, his response was quiet, but incredibly firm. "Don't give them a mistake they can use," Derek said. "If you play this emotionally, Richard will crush you legally. I'm texting you a contact right now. Her name is Karen Blake. Call her the second the sun comes up." True to his word, the number arrived before we even hung up. At exactly 8 the next morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table, dialing Karen's office. She listened to my entire frantic recounting with professional detachment. When she finally spoke, her verdict was a heavy dose of reality. "You need concrete, undeniable evidence," Karen explained, her tone sympathetic but uncompromising. "Without a court order or a verified emergency situation documented by the authorities, you cannot just take him. If you want to save your brother, you have to build an airtight legal case." By the next afternoon, it was no longer just one bad night. Karen's instructions echoed in my head as I drove toward my brother's middle school. She had been exceptionally clear. Making wild accusations to Child Protective Services without a paper trail would only result in a brief home visit, which Richard would easily charm his way through. Instead, I needed documented patterns. I needed to legally request the information I was entitled to as an emergency contact. My first stop was the school counselor's office. The counselor, a weary-looking woman, hesitated at first, but after I proved my identity, she sighed and pulled up his file. The details were worse than I imagined. She confirmed that Owen frequently begged the cafeteria staff for extra portions at lunch. Last month, he had even asked a teacher if he could wrap up leftover sandwiches to take home in his backpack. "He sleeps through second period constantly," the counselor admitted, her voice dropping. "And his attendance is poor. He has missed 14 days this semester alone. We emailed your father and stepmother several times regarding his exhaustion and hunger. I felt my stomach knot. What did they say? Marla responded. She claimed he was simply acting out due to unresolved grief over losing your mother, Diane. She told us he was refusing to eat at home to manipulate them and asked us not to indulge his behavior. The manipulation was breathtaking. They were starving him and using my dead mother as the excuse. Leaving the school, I dug into the medical files Diane had meticulously organized before she passed away. As Owen's secondary emergency contact on those old forms, I managed to get his current clinic on the phone. A brief conversation revealed a disturbing trend over the past 2 years. Routine physicals had been repeatedly canceled and never rescheduled. His 6-month dental cleanings were completely abandoned. Even a prescribed asthma inhaler refill had been ignored for months. But the final piece of the puzzle wasn't at the clinic or the school, it was at the bank. Before Diane died, she had established an educational trust fund specifically designated for Owen's future needs, appointing Richard as the custodian but allowing me limited viewing access to the statements. I hadn't checked the portal in years, assuming the money was safely gathering interest. Sitting in my parked car, I logged into the account on my phone. My eyes scanned the recent transaction history, stopping dead on a massive, unauthorized withdrawal made 3 months ago. Exactly $15,000 had been transferred out of the trust. The memo line beside the transaction read, "Home Wellness Improvement." My mind raced, aligning the dates. 3 months ago was the exact same time Marla had gutted the mansion's perfectly functional kitchen to install custom Italian marble countertops and commercial-grade appliances. It was right before she hosted that lavish charity dinner to boost Richard's public image. They hadn't just neglected him, they were actively siphoning the money our mother left for his well-being to fund their extravagant lifestyle. Staring at the screen, a sickening clarity washed over me. The restricted food access, the abandoned medical care, the isolation he endured, none of this was about strict parenting or establishing boundaries. It was a calculated, deliberate system of control and financial theft. They were hiding their embezzlement behind the closed doors of a wealthy estate, depriving a child to finance their luxury. Marla's charity dinner came at the worst possible time, which made it useful. By the following evening, my phone was buzzing with notifications from social media. Marla was broadcasting her philanthropic efforts live from the mansion. The theme of her gala was horrifyingly ironic, raising funds to support local school meal programs and combat childhood hunger. The hypocrisy was so blatant it made my chest tight. I scrolled through the polished images. There were sweeping shots of banquet tables groaning under the weight of roasted meats, artisan cheeses, and towering dessert displays. There was Marla, draped in an elegant gown, smiling radiantly next to wealthy donors. Richard stood faithfully behind her, the picture of a supportive, civic-minded husband. The caption underneath the main post read, "True compassion means taking responsibility for the children in our community who cannot feed themselves." I zoomed in on the background of every single picture, meticulously searching the crowded rooms. Owen was nowhere to be found. A moment later, a text message popped onto my screen. It was from Owen. "They told me I can't come out tonight. I can hear the music and people eating downstairs." My fingers hovered over the keys, my pulse pounding in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to drive over there, kick the front doors open, and drag my brother out in front of all those wealthy donors. But Karen's warning anchored me to my chair. Do not create a scene. If I crashed the event, I would just look like an estranged, jealous daughter trying to ruin a charity gala. I forced myself to take a deep breath and replied, "Stay strong. I am working on it." Hours later, long after the gala had ended and the social media updates had stopped, an unknown number flashed on my screen. I answered cautiously, "Is this Jenna?" The voice on the other end was raspy, carrying a thick Southern accent. "My name is Ruth Mercer. Until last month, I was the head housekeeper for the Caldwell family." I sat up straight, instantly alert. I knew my father's surname carried weight in this town, but staff rarely reached out to me. "Why are you calling me, Ruth?" "Because Marla fired me," Ruth stated bluntly, devoid of any hesitation. "She let me go because I started asking too many questions. I noticed the locks going up. I saw your brother hiding bread in his pockets after the family finished eating. When I finally took it up with Richard, he told me to mind my own business and handed me my severance check. I gripped the phone tighter, my voice barely above a whisper. You saw them doing it. I saw plenty, Ruth replied grimly. But seeing isn't proving. That's why I'm calling you. Before Marla changed all the security passwords, my job was to monitor the delivery and garage cameras. Sometimes the angles caught the kitchen and the back hallways. My heart skipped a beat. Are you saying you have videos? I kept a copy of the backups before I packed my bags. I knew something wasn't right, and I wasn't about to let that boy take the fall for their cruelty. Ruth paused, the line crackling slightly. I'm not doing this over the phone. Meet me tomorrow morning at the Starlight Diner off Highway 9. Come alone. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, exhaling a long, trembling breath. Karen had demanded concrete, undeniable proof to break through my father's legal defenses, and now I finally had a willing witness and the promise of objective documentation. Ruth met me at a diner off the interstate with a flash drive in her purse. She slid it across the sticky table, her expression heavy with guilt. I'm no hero, Ruth admitted, her voice low. I needed the paycheck, so I kept my mouth shut for a long time. I convinced myself it wasn't my place to interfere. But after that disgusting charity gala, I couldn't stomach it anymore. I thanked her and plugged the small drive into my laptop. I didn't want to watch the files in public, but I needed to verify what we had. I clicked on a file dated 2 weeks ago. The crisp video loaded immediately, capturing the kitchen's gleaming interior. Marla walked into the frame, tapping a code into the keypad. Owen stood a few feet away, watching her open the door. He reached out tentatively, but Marla smoothly blocked his path. Though the audio was muffled, her condescending tone was unmistakable. She clearly told him he would only eat when she explicitly allowed it. The most damning part wasn't Marla's cruelty, it was Richard. My father walked right past them, glancing directly at his starving son before heading for the living room without breaking his stride. He saw everything. He simply didn't care. I skipped to the final clip, recorded late the previous night. It showed Owen sneaking down into the garage, desperately rummaging through the catering bins left over from the fundraiser, searching for discarded food while the hosts slept peacefully upstairs. I closed the laptop, feeling physically ill. The temptation to post the videos online and publicly destroy them was overwhelming, but I knew better. I drove straight to Karen's office and handed her the drive. Karen watched the clips in silence. When she finished, she closed her eyes. This is no longer a typical family dispute, she said professionally. This is systematic abuse. I am calling the authorities. Karen contacted the County Child Protective Services and the local precinct, submitting the evidence through official legal channels. 2 hours later, Detective Henson sat across from us in an austere interview room, reviewing the footage. He didn't slam his fists on the table or make grand, dramatic promises. He was calm, procedural, and entirely serious. We have sufficient grounds to file an official report, the detective stated, closing his notebook. I am authorizing an immediate welfare check. An agent from Child Services, Alan Pierce, will be dispatched to the residence alongside our officers. No sirens wailed. There was no theatrical raid. But as I sat there, I realized it didn't matter. The quiet truth captured on that flash drive had transformed a helpless child's whispers into solid, legally binding evidence. Richard's wealth and Marla's fake philanthropy could no longer protect them from the consequences of their calculated neglect. The process of getting Owen into my custody took months of grueling legal battles, but that afternoon in the police station was the beginning of the end for my father's absolute control. Looking back now, I realize the hardest part of surviving a toxic family isn't just surviving the psychological toll. It's finding the courage to expose it. Abusers rely heavily on the silence of their victims and the complicity of bystanders to maintain their pristine public images. They build massive walls of wealth and authority, hoping you will feel too small to challenge them. But you are never as powerless as they want you to believe. If you are trapped in a situation where your boundaries are constantly violated and your reality is denied, remember this: The truth doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. It just needs to be documented, protected, and placed in the hands of those who can enforce the law. Stand your ground, gather your evidence quietly, and never let anyone convince you that protecting yourself or someone you love is a betrayal. The emergency hearing did not feel dramatic at first. In the days leading up to it, Alan Pierce, the agent assigned by Child Services, had conducted his unannounced welfare check. His initial assessment confirmed every nightmare I had documented. He found the heavy-duty keypad securing the pantry door. When he gently asked my brother for the code, Owen admitted he had never been given it. Alan noted how Owen's small bedroom was entirely isolated from the main living areas, tucked away near the drafty back stairs. He observed the massive stainless steel refrigerator overflowing with imported cheeses and catering leftovers, starkly contrasting the absolute restriction placed on the only child in the house. When Alan questioned Marla during the walkthrough, she didn't even flinch. She smiled thinly, smoothing her designer blouse, and calmly explained that they were simply providing essential structure and discipline to a troubled child. But Karen didn't waste time arguing over parenting philosophies. She immediately filed an aggressive motion for temporary emergency guardianship. Now, we were sitting in a sterile family court chamber. Marla was dressed in a modest, elegantly understated beige suit, playing the role of the exhausted, sacrificing stepmother to absolute perfection. Richard sat beside her, projecting the aura of a respectable patriarch deeply burdened by family drama. "Your Honor, my daughter Jenna has been estranged from our household for years," Richard stated smoothly, his deep voice echoing in the small room. "She simply does not understand the complexities of our current situation. Owen is still reacting poorly to the tragic loss of his mother. He acts out. He snacks too much, spoiling his appetite for nutritious meals, which is why we had to secure the pantry. It is an unfortunate but necessary boundary." I kept my hands folded tightly on the wooden table. I refused to argue emotionally. Losing my temper was exactly what Richard was waiting for. Karen stood up, her expression completely stoic. She didn't deliver a fiery speech. Instead, she methodically dismantled their carefully constructed facade piece by piece. First, she submitted transcripts of Owen's panicked text messages. Next came the sworn affidavits from the middle school counselor detailing his constant exhaustion and begging for leftover cafeteria sandwiches. Then, she presented the clinic logs verifying 2 years of abandoned medical and dental care, swiftly followed by bank statements proving a massive, unauthorized withdrawal from Diane's educational trust fund. Finally, she submitted Alan Pierce's preliminary home inspection report. Richard's confident posture stiffened, but he maintained a tight, dismissive smile. It wasn't until Karen called her star witness that the atmosphere shifted. Ruth Mercer walked quietly into the courtroom, holding her purse with both hands. She took the stand and formally submitted the flash drive. Karen hooked her laptop to the chamber's monitor. "Your Honor, I present Exhibit F." The footage began to play. The room fell utterly silent. The high-definition video showed Marla entering the pantry code, smoothly blocking a hungry, slumped Owen from reaching inside and coldly telling him he would only eat when she permitted it. Then, the video showed Richard walking past them, glancing at his starving son, and continuing into the living room without breaking his stride. Ruth calmly confirmed the authenticity of the security system. She explained her previous role in monitoring the delivery cameras, leaving no room for them to claim the video was doctored. Alan Pierce immediately corroborated her testimony, stating that the psychological intimidation he witnessed during his inspection perfectly matched the chilling indifference captured on the screen. The undeniable truth was suffocating, the elegant facade shattered. "This is an outrage!" Richard suddenly exploded, slamming his fist onto the defense table. His face flushed a dark, angry red, the refined patriarch mask completely slipping. "She has absolutely no right to interfere in my household. She is trying to destroy my family over a misunderstanding." The judge slammed his gavel, his voice sharp and unyielding. "Sit down, Mr. Lawson. You do not dictate rights in my courtroom. The court will decide what is happening to this family." Beside him, Marla tried to deploy her final weapon. She brought her hands to her face, attempting to sob, shoulders shaking as she tried to paint herself as a victim of a vicious smear campaign. But it was entirely useless. The judge wasn't looking at her tears. He was looking at the paused frame of the security footage, where a grown woman coldly denied a desperate child a piece of bread. The undeniable visual evidence, stacked upon the crushing weight of medical neglect and financial theft, had completely eradicated their lies. Owen left that mansion with one backpack and no goodbye. By the end of that brutal emergency hearing, the judge had officially granted me full temporary custody. The legal transition was swift and completely uncompromising. Richard was strictly limited to professionally supervised visitation, an arrangement he predictably refused to attend out of sheer, wounded pride. Marla was legally barred from having any direct contact with my brother whatsoever. Furthermore, the judge immediately ordered Diane's educational trust to be transferred to an independent fiduciary, demanding that Richard surrender all associated financial records for a thorough forensic audit. The fallout didn't stop at the heavy courtroom doors. Once the county's internal investigations concluded and the existence of the security footage became an undeniable reality in our social circle, Marla was quietly but swiftly removed from her prestigious charity board. The financial embezzlement case regarding the trust fund was spun off into a separate, ongoing legal battle, one that would likely force my father to pay back every stolen cent with heavy penalties. There was no grand reconciliation. We didn't have a tearful family dinner where everyone learned to forgive and forget. There were no emotional phone calls from relatives begging me to let things go simply because we are blood. I completely severed the ties. I changed my personal phone number the very next morning, formally informing them that all future communication had to go exclusively through Karen's law office. I refused to let their polished toxicity infect our lives for another second. Owen moved into my small apartment, and slowly, a new, peaceful normal began to take shape. He started attending a new middle school where his attendance remained perfect. He began intensive weekly therapy sessions to process the profound psychological damage they had inflicted. The healing process wasn't instantaneous. There were nights he still woke up anxious. But most importantly, he had unrestricted access to regular warm meals. He didn't need to hoard food anymore, though it broke my heart to see that the ingrained survival habit of hiding snacks in his pockets took many months to finally fade away. Looking at him now, healthy and genuinely smiling over a simple, quiet dinner in our modest kitchen, I realized the most profound truth about systemic abuse. A massive estate and a wealthy zip code do not guarantee a child is safe. Wealth often just buys better locks, thicker walls, and prettier excuses to hide the cruelty behind. Your family does not have the inherent right to demand your unwavering loyalty or your silence, especially when they are the ones actively causing the harm. Society often heavily pressures us to forgive our toxic relatives, pushing the dangerous narrative that a broken family must be pieced back together at all costs. But the reality is much clearer and much more liberating. Some of the best, most beautiful happy endings are not about reconciliation or forgiveness. Sometimes the only true happy ending is simply escaping and never looking back. Thank you for staying with Owen's story until the end. If you have ever had to choose safety over family pressure, share your thoughts below, because someone reading them may need that courage tonight.